Good afternoon, everybody. Happy birthday to Flannery O'Connor. I'm Bruce Gentry, Professor Emeritus of English here at Georgia College and still for a while, editor of the Flannery O'Connor Review. I can give you a flyer for the next issue if you'd like one. I want to thank everyone who has worked to make this week's celebrations possible, but especially Katie Simon and Jessica McQuain for all their work for the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities, which I'm pleased to serve as a fellow. I also want to applaud Evan Levitt for his fine work on installing O'Connor's artwork in this room. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to introduce Robert Donahoo, who's a full professor of English at Sam Houston State University. He always manages to make his scholarship both rigorous and entertaining. In addition to being a scholar, he's a creative writer, and he is into theater, especially Houston theater, in a big way. You are in for a treat this afternoon. Robert Donahoo was a participant in the 2007 National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute that we hosted here at Georgia College. When we repeated versions of this Summer Institute, basically a month-long boot camp for college teachers wanting to learn more about teaching O'Connor's works, Donahoo became my co-director in both 2014 and 2023. He selected and oversaw guest lecturers, led field trips, advised teachers on their scholarly projects, solved roommate problems about sharing a bathroom, you name it. And he served most recently on the organizing committee for the O'Connor Conference that we hosted here at Georgia College last September. The folks at the National Endowment for the Humanities have a very high opinion of Georgia College, in part because of the good work that Robert Donahoo did for us here on our summer institutes. I've known Bob Donahoo for decades, long before 2007, and it's always fun to work with him on our numerous O'Connor projects. The secret of our success as co-workers seems to be that we're both eager to do things that the other is happy to pass along. I shall always be grateful to Bob for dealing with the situation when one of our 2023 NEH Summer Institute participants had a death in the family. Bob arranged for an emergency taxi ride from Milledgeville to the Atlanta airport in the middle of the night. Donahoo, who has served as president of the Flannery O'Connor Society for 2 terms, is a brilliant scholar. He's published a great many articles on Flannery O'Connor, as well as on such other Southern luminaries as Harper Lee, Clyde Edgerton, and especially Horton Foote. He's published several times in the Flannery O'Connor Review, and I'm especially grateful to him for conducting thorough interviews with 2 of the cousins of Flannery O'Connor, Frances Florencourt and Louise Florencourt. He has co-edited 2 books of O'Connor criticism. First, Flannery O'Connor in the Age of Terrorism from University of Tennessee Press, and then, with me, Approaches to Teaching the Works of Flannery O'Connor, published by the Modern Language Association of America. As O'Connor's Mr. Shortley might say, we fought and bled and died to get that book done. These days, Donahoo is at work on a monograph about O'Connor, and I've read enough of it to know it is going to be one of the very best books ever written about O'Connor. Donahoo is a sophisticated, historical sort of critic, always digging up facts that matter deeply to the subject at hand, facts that others might miss. His piece on Milledgeville monuments is one of the best O'Connor articles ever. I admire his persistence and his attention to detail, along with his imaginative analyses. Luckily for us this afternoon, he's been studying O'Connor's visual art for some time, so that he is probably now the expert on the full span of O'Connor's visual art as it relates to her writing. I'm honored to count Robert Donahoo as a good friend whom I hope to continue to work with. I thank him for his thorough, thoughtful, careful essay that he wrote for the O'Connor exhibit catalog. I hope you got a copy of that. And now, please join me in welcoming back to Georgia College, Robert Donahoo.
I didn't even have to pay a lot for that introduction. Flannery O'Connor's art has been in my mind for approximately 2 years since I first saw the large paintings that you see around us here. So it's appropriate that right now she's over my head. Probably because I'm over my head too in this project. But hopefully you'll enjoy being a little more creative, a little more spontaneous about what we're going to talk about. And then hopefully you can explain to me why I'm wrong at the end. This paper does have an epigraph, and it's on the screen. It was the way I found my way into this project. It's from Abraham Heschel's book, The Sabbath and Its Meaning for Man. It's the epigraph says, "Labor is a craft, but perfect rest is an art." To my knowledge, Flannery O'Connor never read the writings of Jewish philosopher and theologian Abraham Heschel, whose words are on the screen. She read and commented on other Jewish thinkers, but not Heschel, even though they eventually shared Farrar Straus as a publisher and were near contemporaries. Both witnessed at varying degrees of distance World War II and the Holocaust. Heschel published The Sabbath, Its Meaning for Modern Man, the source of the epigraph, in 1951, a year before Wise Blood appeared. And his The Prophets appeared only 2 years after O'Connor's novel about prophets, The Violent Bear It Away. Nevertheless, he is absent from her letters, library, and reviews. Yet, in Heschel, I find a framework for approaching my subject here today, O'Connor's visual art. The art presents a problem. We celebrate this week O'Connor's centennial not because of her talent with brushes, palette knives, pens, and paint, but because of her artistry as a writer. As the appraiser of the visual art collection for the O'Connor Charitable Trust notes in his official report, the value of each painting is not necessarily a reflection of the quality of O'Connor's craftsmanship. The art has value to those who will research her work because of the insight into her thinking. But what insights? Ralph C. Wood's most recent book suggests he sees, at least in O'Connor's self-portrait, the same type of theological insights that scholars for decades have dug out of her fiction. Heschel offers an alternate path, a dichotomous way of seeing O'Connor's two types of creative endeavors, as craft and art, terms he associates respectively with labor and rest. That O'Connor saw her writing as craft achieved through labor does not need extensive argument here, though I'll try to do it. The evidence of her manuscripts and the judgments of her friends, colleagues, and scholars all affirm the craft of her writing. Stephen Driggers, who co-edited the catalog of O'Connor manuscripts at Georgia College, asserts, Flannery O'Connor wrote by rewriting. She found especially congenial the example of her mentors, the new critics, and she repeatedly returned to repeated incidents and characters, either to exhaust them or to uncover their possibilities for her fiction, often producing dozens of variants of single episodes. Sarah Gordon notes that the typescripts of Wise Blood alone fill approximately 2,000 pages. Even stories published quickly received crafting and revision. Writing Betty Hester about Good Country People, she claims she produced it, quote, in about 4 days, the shortest I've ever written anything in. And yet, she still found time to send the story to both Carolyn Gordon and Robert Giroux and to revise it based on their suggestions. Even at the end of her career, when she was dying of complications from lupus, she used what energy she had to revise Parker's Back, itself a story featuring a meticulous artist, sending it to Carolyn Gordon for revision advice and explaining her writing situation. Quote, I've been home 3 weeks today, confined to 2 rooms, am not supposed to walk around, something about they want all the blood to go to the kidneys. But my mama arranged the table so I can get out of bed right into the electric typewriter. Enclosed, the result. And though some have criticized the fiction as over-revised, most scholars, and certainly myself, who've read O'Connor's typescripts, conclude that despite any sparks of genius and wit that ended up on the cutting room floor, her fiction is always richer for the crafting. In short, as a writer, she did what she theorized a writer should do when she explained, quote, "There's a certain grain of stupidity that the writer of fiction can hardly do without. And this is the quality of having to stare, of not getting the point at once. The longer you look at one subject, the more of the world you see in it. And it's well to remember that the serious fiction writer always writes about the whole world, no matter how limited his particular scene." Now, whatever viewers think O'Connor's paintings are and do, they will not find the fiction's level of craft and labor. Again, the O'Connor Trust appraiser puts it this way: her paintings reflect a love for creative art. Though her craftsmanship becomes better, many of the paintings in this appraisal are coarse and muddy with little detail. They appear to have been painted quickly, as if the satisfaction of seeing a finished painting was greater than the desire to craft a refined picture. I regard this rough and loose look as part of her style. This love for creative art brings me back to Heschel's dichotomy. For if her writing is her craft, her labor, her painting, what all of her characters would likely think of if they ever heard the word art is her rest. In Heschel's terms, this art is her Sabbath. To see what this entails, we need to look at some of the art, starting with a childhood drawing from the Emory University archives. When displayed as part of the 2023-24 exhibition at Emory, the text beside this drawing linked it to young Flannery's emotional life. And this is what they posted on beside the painting. "Now everything has changed. Flannery is an adolescent. Her father shows signs of the illness that would soon claim his life, and even the sun is no longer smiling." Yet, I believe the sun hardly tells the whole story. Mother is grimly leading the parade forward, dressed in proper Southern fashion: a dress, low heels, a hat, and gloves she could direct traffic in. She is in control, and yet she's gently satirized. If father, trailing behind her, shows signs of illness, these signs hide well beneath his bow tie, cigar, and monk-like tonsured hair. More significantly, his right hand reaches back affectionately but shyly towards his daughter, whose own right hand reaches out as if enacting a jewel heist in what seems a gesture of affection, possibly joy, if the smiling flower between them is any sign. Crude in technique, uncrafted, it nevertheless shows a complex and emotional personal life not readily visible in O'Connor's crafted fiction with its adherence to the new critical doctrine of the impersonality of art. Consciously or not, the drawing responds to a moment, and if it offers no great theological or philosophical vision, it remains readable for O'Connor's usually offstage emotional life. Windows into a hidden inner life is what I find most intriguing and consistent in the works featured in this exhibit. Consider her juvenile art found during the restoration of the family's Green Street house. It consists of a few lino-cut cards, a painted golf ball, and 2 or 3 items whose content is actually difficult to determine due to being lightly drawn on wood. You can see them at Andalusia. There are also 3 buildings and a landscape, but the bulk of those paintings are portraits, at least 30, all of adults, and one has a dog on a leash, but otherwise no birds, no children. Most of them are small but fully realized portraits, a few full-length, most headshots, done on wood using colorful oil paints. Few of the subjects have been even tentatively identified, but collectively they speak to a child whose experience is largely an adult world. How did Flannery feel leaving in a house with her mother, her great aunt Gertrude, 2 other aunts, female boarders, and on weekends, her uncles. The portrait suggests a little frustration, possibly anger at being outnumbered and entrapped by adults ready to correct the only child within their reach for her errors, oddities, and missteps. Consider the portrait that may be of a woman named Mrs. Weber. According to Brad Gooch's biography, Mrs. Weber was a boarder described by family friend Mary Jo Thompson as someone who, quote, carried on two-way conversations with her dead husband, while Mrs. Weber and Flannery cleaned up after meals. In a violation of the rules of Southern politeness, Flannery's portrait echoes these oddities. The figure's hair is wound tight up against her head. Her teeth just jut out between her lips, and her nose resembles an ice cream cone stuck on her face. Similar to this portrait is a woman that's, again, very tentatively identified as Lois Watts. I did a little research on Mrs. Watts and read her obituary, which describes her as belonging to 7 different organizations, ranging from nursing school to the local garden club. In the words from Seinfeld, she was a joiner. And the portrait suggests her high, small-town social life. The pearl-like necklace, the large feather rising out of her red hennaed hair, the arched eyebrows suggestive of plucking, and most of all, those heavily red lipstick lips that make her mouth seem larger than normal. Now, I don't know what O'Connor's interaction with Mrs. Watts was. The portrait, however, does not suggest warmth and friendship. Even the portrait board with 2 heads on it, again, tentatively identified as O'Connor's great aunt Gertrude and Aunt Mary, better known as sister, is not particularly loving. Aunt Gertie, who lived on the top floor of the Green Street house and sent daily postcards to Flannery's Florencourt relatives in Boston, reporting all the family news, is given lots of signs of age. White hair, pin's nest spectacles, a high dark collar, and uplifted eyebrows suggesting alarm or offense. Sister's image is even less flattering, with her face round on one side and flat on the other, her hair iron gray and small pursed lips. Described by Gooch as the impresario of the Klein mansion, she ran that house. And imagine how a child responds to that. She ran that house. And after Flannery's mother, she was the authority Flannery would have had to obey. It seems difficult to believe that these are gentle remembrances on the painter's part. Rather, they ooze a child's sass, the passive but loudly verbal resistance often seen in O'Connor's children characters. Remember June Starr in the early story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, who makes mouthy comments about her grandmother? She wouldn't stay at home for $1 million. About Red Sammy's wife? I wouldn't live in a broken down place like this for $1 million. And even her killer, Bobby Lee, she says, he reminds me of a pig. At the other end of O'Connor's career, she creates young Tarwater in The Violent Bared Away, who tells his uncle with no Southern politeness, why don't you shut your big mouth? This, of course, is the sin the young protagonist of A Temple of the Holy Ghost has to pray about. Help me not to give her so much sass. Help me not to talk like I do. It's also a memory her relatives have of Flannery in her drawings. Louise Florencourt, her cousin who is only a few months younger than Flannery, told me in an interview, more than once, Regina said of the drawings that Flannery spared nobody. I mean, Flannery was a brat when she was young. She was a brat, but Regina let her get away with everything. She always called her parents Regina and Ed. Somebody asked her why, and she said, what would you call them? That's their names. Now, my point is not to defame Mary Flannery, accusing her of being a rude child. I've got children of my own that can fall into that category. Rather, I want to stress that she puts her emotions into her art. She releases, and I think probably finds rest. And what I argue here holds true for most of these early portraits, and it's ironically underscored by the 4 non-portrait pieces among the Green Street juvenile material, a landscape and 3 buildings. Unlike the brightly colored portraits, all four are significantly dark. The appraiser's report labels the three buildings as nighttime views, with the building paintings having a moon in their skies. These are not sassy. They are moody, depressed. Only one painting has a definite human figure in it, a body that stands backlit in the door of a two-story house where dull light comes through every vacant window. No comedy or satire here. The houses are generic, the kind of box buildings common in child drawings, dated by the appraiser as being painted between 1935 and 1945. These pictures, like the caricatures, have their origin in the years of her father's diagnosis from lupus and his subsequent death in February 1941. Years that also saw the family uprooted from Savannah to Atlanta, and then for Flannery and her mother to Milledgeville and Green Street before the separation from her hand-reaching father. Even before his death. These years of emotional loss and turmoil fit well with the landscape and building paintings, suggesting that they are public expressions that release private adolescent emotions. Then they balance the sass of the caricatures. We can see this in art early and until now, lost measures of the types of inner struggles O'Connor reveals in her prayer journal. There she writes in 1946 of, quote, the throwing off of certain adolescent habits and habits of mind as she focuses on her faith and her writing. She pens this in 1947, I don't want to be doomed to mediocrity in my feelings for Christ. I want to feel, I want to love. Take me, dear Lord, and set me in the direction I am to go. That direction would be towards craft, towards seemingly impersonal fiction. But just as her emotional life finds an outlet and relief in the journal, so her childhood trauma and anger find outlets in visual art, not because they are diligently crafted, but because they are not. And I'm going to talk about the adult paintings in a similar light. A worthy test of such a claim is O'Connor's self-portrait, the only work among her adult paintings that has any date of production more specific than 51 to 64, the date she resided at Andalusia following the onset of lupus. The self-portrait's dating comes from her published correspondence. Following a letter in which she announces to Robert and Sally Fitzgerald that she is taking painting again, she sends them this announcement. I painted me a self-portrait with the pheasant cock that is really a cutter. But Regina keeps saying, I think you would look so much better if you had on a tie. Sally Fitzgerald dates this letter to the summer of 1953, a time biographer Brad Gooch notes when Flannery was taking painting classes in Milledgeville from Frank Stanley Herring, whose many portraits can be easily accessed online, and whose mentorship of O'Connor's painting could explain why she painted an image of herself at all. Now, Ralph C. Wood speculates that O'Connor, quote, patterned her self-portrait after the Christ Pantocrator icon found at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula. Wood convincingly argues that the icon and the self-portrait mirror each other in some details, but he then uses O'Connor's painting to ravel out her theology of the devil, based on the presence of the horned pheasant that is pressed like a memento mori in the bottom corner of the painting. As support, he uses a comment O'Connor mailed to Janet McCain a decade after announcing the self-portrait to the Fitzgeralds. That's a letter I'm going to spend a little time on. It opens with O'Connor thanking McCain for sending magazine clippings about Flannery and her work, and then it comments on the photos of O'Connor seen in the clippings. This is Flannery. I hate like sin to have my picture taken, and most of them don't look much like me. Or maybe they look like I'll look after I've been dead a couple of days. Those in Jubilee were taken in the winter by a very arty photographer whose favorite types of pictures were migrant fruit pickers and the interiors of flop houses. We have a beautiful place, but he made it look like Oklahoma after the dust storm. I look like one of the Okies with the burden of world peace on my shoulders. The picture in the critic is a little more like me, but the interview's not very good. I hate to deliver opinions. On most things, I don't deserve an opinion, and on a lot of things, I simply don't have an opinion. You can just raise your eyebrows a little bit. At this point, she begins to discuss the self-portrait. In the self-portrait, that is not a peacock. That's a pheasant's cock. I used to raise pheasants, but they got too much for me, for they require attention and have to be caged. The peacocks take care of themselves, but I like the look of the pheasant cock. He has horns and a face like the devil. The self-portrait was made 10 years ago after a very acute siege of lupus. I was taking cortisone, which gives you what they call a moon face, and my hair had fallen out to a large extent from the high fever, so I looked pretty much like the painting. When I painted it, I didn't look either at myself in the mirror or at the bird. I know what we both look like. 3 things in this long passage merit some bookmarking as we consider O'Connor's visual art. The reference to Andalusia as a beautiful place. The mention of her experience prior to the painting as a very acute siege of lupus. And her claim that she knew what we, herself and the bird, both look like. I'll start with the lupus flare-up. Given the date of her letter to the Fitzgeralds, she's likely referring to an episode that took place while visiting Connecticut in 1952. Forced to retreat home, she received 2 blood transfusions, an increased dosage of ACTH, and spent 6 weeks in bed. This experience certainly would have been severe, since according to Gooch, O'Connor's form of lupus could compromise joints, blood vessels, lungs, kidneys, heart, or brain, and included symptoms such as rashes, high fevers, photosensitivity, oral ulcers, hematologic disorders, and arthritis. And if her flare-up in 1952 was less alarming than the first major one in 1951, that one required 10 transfusions. It certainly was severe enough to bring back memories of both the earlier attack and her father's death from lupus in 1941. In short, the self-portrait appears in the wake of reminders of the nearness of death. Indeed, the portrait shows signs of the illness. O'Connor explicitly refers to the moon face produced by the cortisone injections. And the portrait, if you look at it really closely, you can see a little bit of redness on the forehead and nose, suggestive of the butterfly-shaped rash that often accompanies the disease and makes, in Michael Kraeling's graphic phrasing, a public spectacle of a victim, turning the body into a vivid display of illness. That O'Connor saw the event as a siege only underscores its severity, thanks to the term's classical connection to the Trojan War, to such biblical events as Ben-Hadad's siege of Samaria, along with a few more recent events, such as the World War II sieges of Leningrad and Bastogne. In painting herself with the marks of a siege, O'Connor is, on the immediate heels of that siege, putting her pain on display, releasing it, something she would do in words only after a decade when she writes the letter to McCain. Indeed, 1958's enduring chill masks her lupus experience behind a manageable disease, undulant fever. O'Connor knows what she looked like, she tells McCain, and the painting shows that emotional self-knowledge. She has been to the brink and returned, more beleaguered than triumphant. If the image can or should be read allegorically, as Wood implies, I argue it is an allegory of her emotional state, an expression of her anxiety and her physically precarious condition. Perhaps the straw hat does resemble a nimbus, suggesting O'Connor's religious beliefs, but it is also just a farm woman's hat, inexpensive, common, not extraordinary, and even if it is and more important, it is done with I'll try this again. And more important, even that hat is unstable in the portrait, as its brushstrokes swirl around her. In contrast, look at the strong, manly fingers that hold the pheasant cock in a tight grip, a necessity for a life-filled bird, suggesting holding on to life itself. However devilish he looks, she is not letting him go. Holding him in the portrait holds her in this life as he anchors her following the disease's siege. Now, again, these are speculations, but their value is they help us see things that reflect a complex view of the artist's personality and her emotional state at a specific moment when she painted the work. That's from the writer's point, the viewer's point of view. For the artist herself, it allows her to release the emotion, to achieve rest from it. Indeed, the self-portrait resembles no passage in O'Connor's writing so much as her description of Revelation's besieged Ruby Turpin, who might also have worn a hat like the one in the self-portrait. The quote goes this way: "Even her virtues were being burned away." That O'Connor would write these fictional lines, imaging, purging, or release within a year of the letter to McCain, underscores her isolation at the time of the portrait. Living on a farm with her mother, who delayed for a long time telling her daughter about her illness, who would she open herself up to emotionally? At the time of the portrait, her friendship with Betty Hester was 2 years in the future. The one with Mariette Lee, 3 to 4 years away. Both individuals with whom she would share details about the illness that she generally remained silent about. Her emotional response is released through the paintings. Emotions whose intensity is suggested by the dark colors of her clothing, the dark, rapid strokes of black on green that form the background, and the swirling lines, yes, of that yellow hat. Assuming such an idea is valid does not, however, make assessing the remaining paintings easier, but it does suggest a pattern to follow. The obstacle to proving this pattern is the lack of established chronology among O'Connor's paintings. I found no references in O'Connor's correspondence or occasional prose to specific paintings outside the self-portrait. Though some of her paintings have Roman numerals penciled on their backs, there's no indication of who put those marks there and no certainty that they reflect the painting's chronological production. This leaves us with a task of making subjective speculations about chronology in order to establish sense. And so fasten your seatbelts. We're going to speculate. I believe that the earliest portraits could well be the fruit still lives. The first of these is in the eyes of the trust's appraiser, possibly not even O'Connor's work. Or it can be the response to a class suggestion. It is not signed, but it does have a Roman numeral on the back, just as the signed portraits do. But assuming it is O'Connor's work, the image is odd. Most of the identifiable fruit is a gourd, 2 lemons, an orange, and probably an apple. And the green vase sits with those on a flat black surface with a hanging checkered cloth in the background. But a second gourd hovers mysteriously in the air. In Salvador Dali, this might be expected, but it doesn't fit with the general realism here, suggesting the artist is struggling to master her perspective, again, making it probably an early work. Yet, despite being seemingly amateurishly flawed, no evidence of it being revised has surfaced. As such, it offers a comparison to another still life with a vase and fruit. Again, the perspective is not totally realistic. The bowl of fruit seems seen from a different angle than is the vase. But the image of the peacock on the vase is striking and inserts O'Connor's signature bird. She is putting something herself into the painting, not just photographically recreating the image. But if noticing the sense of her art as rest is difficult, if not impossible, in the fruit paintings, such a sense is encouraged by 3 of O'Connor's floral still lives. The first of these is the most mundane. It's reminiscent in its ordinariness of the titular plant in O'Connor's 1946 story, The Geranium, the one old Dudley waits every day to see on a New York neighbor's window while remembering the better-looking geraniums back home. Here, the flowers are in a fairly ordinary squat red vase, wedged into a corner of a table as if in a defensive position. The vase is off-center in the canvas, and the canvas is itself smaller than the size O'Connor usually used. The colors of the flowers seem to melt or be faintly blown into the background as variously colored as the blooms. As with the story, a reader may sense the artist's tentativeness about her art. Though there is a reaching for beauty in this painting, its blooms are ordinary, cornered. They seem to reflect doubts and hope for both her art and her craft in the wake of her disease. But the other two floral still lifes release different emotions and point to a growing confidence. The first features less traditional flowers, more blooming branches that form not a bouquet, but a nest of buds that spill out and rise above the opaque white vase. They sit on a surface that looks slanted, and by leaving space around the blooms, can you notice that? The plants have an aura that, with the white vase, lightens the darkening background. A second painting goes even further. Its yellow flowers explode out of a clear glass vase. They glow against the dark brown of the table and the green and black background. This is not a botanist's drawing, but an emotional image, seldom seen in her carefully crafted fiction. Though, for some, it may recall this brief line from A Good Man Is Hard to Find. The trees were full of silver white sunlight, and the meanest of them sparkled. When this third floral painting is placed beside the one of the art class, it may confirm that we're still looking at early work, since the painting being created by the woman with short, dark hair resembles the yellow still life discussed earlier, thanks to the yellow mass at its center. Meanwhile, the paintings by the other two students, both positioned in the wake of the dark-haired woman, are more like the other two still lifes I've mentioned. Note the red blooms being painted by the seated figure and the upward stretching stems in the third painting. However, this painting offers even more, especially in its use of color. Suggestive of the front porch of Andalusia with its brown wooden floor, white wood siding, and the large yellow window shades, the colors lighten as the eye moves from the bottom of the painting to the top. The colors of the four painters' clothes are as varied as those in their floral still lives. The figures themselves, with sharp noses and wide bottoms, suggest figures in O'Connor's college cartoons, and they add to the comic or joyous sense of the word. But it is in the dominating canvas, encircled in yellow on a window, that most suggest the sense of joy in the activity, even as it refers back to the nimbus hat in the self-portrait. For the artist, this work, with its seemingly quick brushstrokes, shows how she feels about creating, about making art. And in these strokes, she evokes the opposite of careful craft. She evokes her emotions and pleasure with creating, things the revealed artist herself could say only outside her fiction. Recall that passage from one of her lecture essays. Last spring, I talked here, and one of the girls asked me, "Miss O'Connor, why do you write?" And I said, "Because I'm good at it." Evaluation is not an issue for the art class painting, but emotions are. The visual art is increasingly a way to express herself rather than delve into ideas. The more O'Connor's paintings shed the scent of the classroom, the more personal they become. This is visible in her animal paintings. Her love for fowls is well known and backed up by O'Connor's claim in King of the Birds to have been marked for life by gaining fame at the age of 5 when a Pathé news team photographed her with the chickens she taught to walk backwards. Her paintings of chickens, pheasants, and ducks abound with the sense of maternal affection that led her as a child to sew clothes for her pet birds and to walk ducks on a leash. This painting in particular shows a tender side of a woman who in a few paragraphs of her fiction could coldly depict a family's murder. The color scheme of the background is dominated by yellows, light greens, and lilac. The central bird is vividly white, and the gray feathers of the other two are speckled with white. And there is that uncharacteristic butterfly in the upper corner. Though they may be disrespectfully feeding upon her mother's flower beds, the paintings suggest no sense of violation in the eyes of the artist. Perhaps she is satisfying her rebellious side, but she's also enjoying watching the birds please themselves by eating. The upper background is not developed at all. No crafting here of every detail. Instead, there is that sense of being in a place of simple ease and comfort that is referenced in the letter to Janet McCain quoted earlier, the beautiful place life had brought her to, that is not Oklahoma after the dust storm. A second chicken painting, a large rooster and two smaller hens, is less bucolic, but revels in the rooster's head-held high confidence. The trio are grouped as if for a family portrait, with the green upper background tempered by streaks of white and the brown earth simple and homogeneous. The face of the rooster, in contrast, resembles a kabuki mask, dabs of red within a field of white, created with short, bold brushstrokes that form a unique figure. The pheasant's painting suggests another family group. The central figure is a horned bird like the one in the self-portrait, but nothing here links the image to the pain of that picture. The central bird shows its distinct and beautiful coloring, handled not in choppy strokes, but with precision and accuracy. The feathers on the chicks and on the main pheasant's tail receive loving attention. And though predators abounded at Andalusia, there is no danger here. Yet if the rooster family and the pheasants display boldness and a lack of concern about those around them, the ducks of this painting suggest nature's reticence, at least on the part of male ducks, who's hiding his green head beneath a wing. The brown female is bolder, more turned towards the painter's eye, not to action, flight, or fight. That does not seem imminent. The image expresses the stillness, the rest in nature for anyone who gets close enough to look at it. One additional animal painting deserves mention here, and it's a clump of cows. And that's a phrase that embarrasses me being from Texas. But I can't figure out what you say about this number of cows. So they just became a clump. We know that Regina kept dairy cattle at Andalusia, and cows and dairy references abound in the mid and late short fiction. Yet cows never become the iconic figure that O'Connor's peacocks do. Here, O'Connor elects not to paint them doing their job, which is being milked, but rather she places them in a pasture where they benefit from two forms of protection: the fence that keeps them from wandering and perhaps suffering the fate of the defenseless herds in Greenleaf, and you should read that one if you don't know what that means, and a tree that, despite showing no foliage in the painting, seems to offer shade that the cows nestle in. Beyond the fence lies an ominous dark tree line in the distance, and above the trees is a purplish early evening sky, perhaps with Georgia heat. Now, the first time I saw this painting, Matisse's La Danse popped into my head. Now, that's a stupid idea if I've ever heard one. It was a really bad connection. And yet, the more I thought about it, it had the benefit of noting that both Matisse's work and O'Connor's are works of emotion rather than intellect. The key difference is the emotion evoked. Matisse's painting, with its fauvist color palette and dancing nudes, suggests emotional liberation and hedonism. O'Connor's painting suggests the peace of limitation and calm. Emotions, the painting implies, she came to associate with Andalusia, but which she expresses here, which she expresses less in her crafted fiction than in the resting art. At the same time, the paintings do not consistently serve as an outlet for only positive emotions. A landscape that is probably a scene at Andalusia echoes the sense of the beautiful place. The use of the palette knife rather than brushes and the inclusion of reflections in the still blue water creates a shimmering effect that allows the viewer to see shapes as one does with clouds in the sky. The scene is thickly serene, protected by the seemingly tall trees, creating a sense of an Eden before the fall. But a second Andalusia landscape could not be more different. Here, in the largest of O'Connor's paintings, and one that hung in a prominent place at Andalusia during her lifetime, The farm's dairy barn is surrounded by dark, barren trees whose uneven branches stretch out ghoulishly. The barn's black entrance is itself ominous, with only the reflection of cold light on the building's tin roof suggesting its difference from the trees. Devoid of both animal and human life, it suggests feelings of isolation and worry. But any sense of despair runs up against the margins of the painting, especially the bottom edge, where flowers are beginning to bloom right around the trees. While readers may imagine that O'Connor's time exiled in rural Georgia and think of it only in terms of her separation from the wider world she had planned to live in before Lupus, this painting offers a more complex sense of her place. This tempts a return to the previous landscape and the recognition that the idyllic shimmering is also the product of dark guardian trees. But nowhere is this sense of conflicting emotions more clearly communicated than in two paintings of what I believe are churches. Though they share a Fauvist or Cubist influence through their use of geometric shapes, they offer two distinct views of church, forming a simple diptych. The green church creates immediately a claustrophobic sense of the building being squeezed between the edges of the canvas. And the dust-colored sky gives only slight relief from the darkness of the blues, greens, blacks, and browns of the building. The windows are blackened out. You can't see through them. Some through stained glass, some just with blackness. Except for one window at the bottom of the frame. Oops, I can't point, but I hope, can you see it? Okay. Now if I could only see where I'm supposed to be in this little script. Through it, viewers may espy inside the church small figures, two of them right in the middle of the painting, suggestive of nuns by their black and white apparel. Oh, it's slight and small, but look and see. The others are more shadows than full figures, but they are signs of humanity, nevertheless. These figures are visible because the space around them is light. Inside the church is light. The tan church is brighter and with sandy tones coloring the walls, and the roof green rather than black, yet there is no interior glimpse. The great distinction is the addition of bare trees that surround the church, their contorted branches reaching out to clutch the building or maybe strangle it. Is this nature submitting itself to God, or the partial vision of the blind man in St. Mark's gospel that sees men as it were trees walking? Or is it something evil and threatening? If someone were a lot braver than I am, they might even suggest a Catholic-Protestant distinction, especially with an artist like O'Connor, born living in the pre-Vatican II Catholic era. But whatever the painting's flaws or strengths, these ambiguous images show the emotion O'Connor experienced concerning the church, something she writes about in her first letter to Betty Hester. This is Flannery. I am a Catholic peculiarly possessed of the modern consciousness, that thing Jung described as unhistorical, solitary, and guilty. To possess this within the church is to bear a burden, the extraordinary burden of the conscious Catholic. I think that the church is the only thing that is going to make the terrible world we are coming to endurable. The only thing that makes the church endurable is that it is somehow the body of Christ and that on this we are fed. It seems to be a fact that you have to suffer as much from the church as for it. The necessary burden, suffering from the church and for it, conflicting ideas embedded in a statement of faith, and it is captured when we see both these paintings set side by side. Also, seeing the paintings as a diptych underscores the absence of a crafted final draft. She lets the conflicting images stand. Such ambiguity is crucial for the remaining set of paintings I wish to discuss. 4 portraits. Of the 4, only one subject has been potentially identified, with the trust appraiser writing that the figure in this painting may be Regina Klein O'Connor. Does that make any sense to you, Francis? It's hard to know. But for the moment, I'm going to trust the appraiser and just head on. Anyone who's read much of O'Connor's writing understands how complicated her mother-daughter relationship was. The two wrote daily when they were apart, and Regina, in the wake of her daughter's lupus, made seeing to Flannery's care the center of her life. Yet there was tension, the tension of sharing a home that anyone probably knows. Gooch refers to Regina as, quote, both a godsend and a challenge for Flannery, who used some of Regina's farming adventures, such as hiring an immigrant family, as grist for her fiction, often with comic and damning effect. This painting is in the comic mode. The subject's facial expression and the body language is reminiscent of Mrs. McIntyre's litany of challenges in The Displaced Person. I've been running this place for 30 years, she said, looking with a deep frown out over the field, and always just barely making it. People think I'm made of money. I have the taxes to pay. I have the insurance to keep up. I have the repair bills. I have the feed bills. And all I've got is the dirt under my feet. The subject's frown, her folded arms, possibly clutching a pillow or a handbag, combined with her money-colored clothes and shoes, the room's tasteful wallpaper, the fresh flowers on the table, all speak to her worry and her prosperity. But equally significant here is the portrait within the portrait, the image of Sandro Botticelli's portrait of the author of the Divine Comedy. It suggests O'Connor's subject as a figure Dante might well be meeting in hell or purgatory, a suffering soul brought to an eternal destination, or at least temporary destination, by its particular sin. Now, given O'Connor's joking about her mother's lack of literary knowledge, Dante eyeing her suffering supplies a comic, if not particularly kind touch, a way of coping with her dependence on her mother, a showing of what she cannot say. A second painting has no comic edge. The subject is unknown, though it may be that given that she is tending Andalusia flower beds, a task Regina O'Connor usually undertook, this too may be a portrait of O'Connor's mother. But the mood is darker. Indeed, based on the sky and the slicker the subject wears, as well as the streaking brushstrokes on the side, a storm is either underway or in the offing. The wooden building, especially the shed in the back, seems susceptible to being washed away, but on the gardener toils. The only truly solid things in the portrait are the gardener and the bell on a pole that still stands at Andalusia. If this is Regina, does the bell toll for her? Does it judge her? If so, the subject meshes with the dreariness that surrounds her. Yet, this painting is not a wasteland. The flowers, the dots of red color appear at the base. Their redness matches the red of the roof's protecting roof, of the house's protecting roof. This piece is not crafted into a judging whole that readers find, in stories such as Greenleaf and Revelation, both tales of women on a farm. The painting is rather a form of releasing emotions and challenging them at the same time. I wind down this talk with a few words on what I think are the two most significant paintings for O'Connor scholars today. Recent days have seen an explosion of scholarly writing about race set off by Paul Ely's New Yorker article, Reckoning with Flannery O'Connor's Racism, itself a response to Angela O'Donnell's study of O'Connor and race, Radical Ambivalence. I will not rehash their arguments here, but I will note one relevant comment from Ely's essay. Quote, "We are still learning who Flannery O'Connor was. Part of that learning will, as of today, include these paintings and how we read them. If they are crafted theological or even ideological revelations, they would likely supply some sign of a meaningful context, but both lack materials that would make their subjects comic or tragic. The child stares at the artist, But her eyes are not, quote, fixed like two drills, as Mary Grace's are in Revelation. Her face is not angry, just enigmatic. Her clothes are beautiful. I would call this an Easter or at least a Sunday outfit, but the painting has no other hint of occasion. Yet the artist paints with care, something the buttons on the dress indicate. The child simply seems to catch the artist's eye. Do we want to call this the racism of the grandmother and a good man who sees an African-American child and declares, "Wouldn't that make a picture now?" Here, no one says anything like that. No one speaks. The painting is theologically and politically mute, unless one sees angel wings suggested by the child's ruffle-cap sleeves, implying innocence or blessing. I think that's a stretch, but it certainly is at odds with, the female children in O'Connor's fiction. Rather, it recalls her interview comment that Alice Walker praised. O'Connor said, "I don't feel capable of entering the mind of a Negro. In my stories, they're seen from the outside. As a painter, she still sees from the outside, but she sees. Her African-American child is not an invisible man." Yet if the child lacks definite context, the painting of an elderly woman quilting has at least one context suggesting a shared affinity with the painter. She is practicing her art, one that is a frequent act, as the sewing bag that hangs on her chair suggests. She sits in the light of a window, flanked by soft pink curtains to enable her aging eyes, already aided by glasses, to see her work, which is a yellow quilt dotted with geometric and multicolored patches. The chair rests on a rag rug created by swirling brushstrokes, a cyclone that she holds in position. If I'm right, her sewing bag bears the design of some type of fowl, a pheasant or even a peacock. It's difficult to see how a painting that is a collage of images from O'Connor's other paintings, to see that painting as condescending or derogatory. Rather than crafting a theological or political insight, the painting captures a rather quiet moment of the racialized world in which O'Connor lived. Both racial paintings fit into Heschel's idea of art as a rest or release. Writing to Betty Hester in 1963, O'Connor images what she labels the race business in terms of confinement, a set of expectations that the writer is expected to conform to in order to show, quote, typical life in the dear old dirty Southland. She asserts, the topical is poison. I got away with it in Everything That Rises, but only because I say a plague on everybody's house as far as the race business goes. Now, however one takes these words, they show the problem she tried to handle with her craft. These paintings take a different approach. The art offers rest from expectations about race by simply painting people around the artist, dressed up and waiting like the child or practicing her own art like the quilter. In doing so, the rigorous crafting of her writing is not required. Rather, she seeks and achieves something personal, a rest in art. Late in his book, The Sabbath, with which this overly long talk began, Abraham Heschel describes Sabbath rest by quoting the Zohar, books of commentary on the Torah. He summarizes the Zohar's teaching with these words, quote, man is given on the Sabbath an additional, a supernal soul, which is all perfection according to the pattern of the world to come. In it, the Holy Spirit that rests upon man and adorns him with a crown like a crown of angels. As we look at O'Connor's paintings and ask ourselves the simple and obvious question, why did she expend her limited energy and time on such work? I think Heschel's words are worth remembering to understand what painting gave her, the perfect rest. The perfect rest that is, I like to think, the crown she wears in the self-portrait. Rest that balances, maybe even enables the intense crafting that makes her glorious fiction. Thank you for listening. Do we have time for Q&A, or do we need to go eat? Okay. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer. Just don't throw anything, because I can barely see. I'm blinded by the light. I feel like St. Paul at this moment in all but goodness. If you're raising a hand, I can't see. Just go ahead in the back there. Impersonality.
So I'm wondering, that stuck with me through the whole talk today, because I'm thinking about, does the craft, as you describe it, Thomas craft, mean no judgment? Or does it mean that judgment is arrived at, or the reader comes to their own judgment through a kind of raw material supplied by the artist?
It does. I think that's really closer to the case. The main emphasis in New Criticism, as T.S. Eliot laid it out in his Tradition of the Individual Artist, is that we weren't supposed to read the poem or the short story and say, this is the artist. We shouldn't be able to see the artist in the work. The work was supposed to be impersonal. Now, they all cheated, including Flannery and including T.S. Eliot. But we actually see them now because we have biographies and research that lets us see them in their work. But the ideal that they always stressed was that art was to be impersonal. Don't put your personal emotions in there. Put in what the scene, the object demands. And I think that's the model that she was taught. And I think that's what she tries to do in a lot of her work. Although the longer she writes, the more personal I think she actually becomes. But that's a different story.
I appreciate what you said about Matisse, the connection that you made. And I look at this self-portrait and see American Gothic, kind of the expressionist 30 of it almost. I'm curious if you've come across any of O'Connor's writing on visual artists that she liked or criticism of artists.
She has a few minor references in her letters. She knew of Picasso. She knew of, I'm trying to think who else. One of the painters that she really likes, I'm doing a project on for the London conference, is Georges Rouault. And if you ever look at a Georges Rouault painting, you will see those blocks. And for me, there's a connection to Parker's back in the way that the tattoo is drawn. But she really likes Rouault's work. And that's the one that stands out in my head. But you can look at the index of Habit of Being or any of the collections, and you'll be surprised at the number of artists that she knew. I think one of the things I tried to talk about in the catalog essay was that if I had been Flannery O'Connor, I would never have known an artist. My parents never took me to a museum. We were middle class, lower middle class workers. O'Connor actually had a lot of contact with art as a child, as a college student. She went to New York. She went to the Met. She saw these places, and she knew art really well. She made friends with artists at Yaddo. So O'Connor was really very encased in the art world. It's odd, because it's not what you think about when you think of Flannery sitting out at Andalusia, feeding the peacocks. But she knew a lot about art, much more so than we give her credit for. Yeah. Oh, I do think she's doing it much more for herself. She has no sense that these paintings are going to become famous and hang in museums around the world. She jokes about that her mother doesn't even like them and sort of lets her hang some by, for whatever reason, maternal affection. So I don't think she has a sense of an outer audience, as she does with her fiction. So I think it's purely internal for her. And, I think that's true of a lot of artists, and not all, but especially artists who are not trying to sell their work every day. They're really painting for their own experience. How do I feel? Let me see if I can put that into paint. I always tell my students when I'm trying to explain to them how art works, we always look at some Rothko paintings. And I always just ask them, what does this make you feel? Do you think that's what the artist felt and that's why he painted it this way? I think something like that is going on here, but O'Connor's not Rothko, thank goodness for that. But does that make sense? And she would not have thought in the Sabbath terms, I think, and we can get real confused about that, but it's just the idea of thinking of Sabbath as a day of rest. And she worked so hard at her fiction. We don't realize how hard she worked. Those 3 hours a day sitting in front of the typewriter, just hoping that an idea would come. And with her energy level and what she had to do, she worked in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. And yet she took time to paint, which is something I've tried to tell myself every so often. Have a little fun and not worry about the next conference paper. O'Connor is always a wise person as an artist. Anybody else? It could be. I'm reading it the way the several different descriptions refer to it as looking like a hat. And, but one of the joys about this, someone asked me this question. They said, what if you're wrong about everything you say? And I said, great, because my name will become famous from everybody correcting all my mistakes. And that's all, as an academic, we really care about, getting our names into print. But I'd say it's part of your experience as the viewer. What do you see? I love the hat, but if you want to make it something else, I'm willing to go with that too. I think that's really good. I think that's really good. I don't have any problem with that. Yes, ma'am. That's part of what Dr. Wood argues when he says it's based off the Christ Pantocrator, because Christ has and things you don't know till you start working on this. There's a difference between a halo and a nimbus. You guys probably all knew this. I'm from Texas, didn't know anything. But the Pantocrator, he definitely has the glowing yellow circle behind his head. And I really think Ralph reads that correctly. I really do. I just think he heads off on a tangent that I don't follow, but I think he reads the painting really well. But you're right. I think that's what he implies. It's got these spiritual meanings that, yeah. And I'm trying to steer away from that. Thanks to one of my old professors who encouraged me, say something different. Try to say something different. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's what my dissertation was about. It was Dante comedy in Flannery O'Connor. She knew Dante really well. And to be honest, if you look at that portrait, it's not the right color for Botticelli's Dante. But the nose and the hat are really right on. And I doubt O'Connor had ever seen the original, but I'm sure she seen like most of us, reproductions of that Dante portrait. And when I thought of it as just the idea of having Dante watch your mother, I got tickled. And I thought it was something funny. And I can't imagine Flannery, with her knowledge of Dante, that's there by happenstance. And especially given that figure, whether it's Regina or not, that figure's frustrated look on her face, which I do think she's worried about. I think she's Mrs. McIntyre more than probably she is Regina. But sure, go ahead in the back. Oh. Well, now you have reason to doubt everything I said because I can't tell the difference. Anybody else? If you want to insult, go ahead. Ask me a lighthearted question. This will be our last one. Oddly enough, I think my favorite is the art school, because that's why it's the lead. It's the lead and the ending example on the thing. And I think what I like about it is that, to me, the first time I saw it, I said Andalusia. I saw the front porch of all of us who've been out there and have sat on the front porch. That is just one of the great places to, stream Flannery. And so when I saw that one, and this is my own idea, I've not seen it anywhere else. I think the woman with the short brown hair may well be Flannery. Or at least a representation, something like her. Because she's painting Flannery's painting. But that's a different story. And again, it's one of those things, nobody has to agree with me. Everybody has a right to see something else. Well, thank you for listening very politely to overly long paper.